Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking about something I remember seeing on the pre-modern Discord a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, a month ago, not sure, but I remember seeing it, and it was about a new format called Old Frame, or at least relatively new. I think last year this was sort of created, although it's not like super duper new. There are other forms of this, but this specific one formed last year, and is pretty interesting. I've been thinking about it a little bit, and I was like, man, this is really cool. This is obviously everything I've ever wanted. But what is Old Frame? What's going on with this format? Let's get into it. All right. So what is it? It's an old format, baby. It's got everything, sort of everything, sort of everything. Alpha through Scourge, and of course, has a restricted list. So this is basically a snapshot of Vintage from Alpha to Scourge. Um, so yeah, this is actually around this time was right around when I actually started playing Vintage. Because I was like, I really wanted to I can't remember what it was. I don't even remember what the impetus for me playing Vintage was. I think it was just like there's all these old cards that I want to play with, and I can't play with them in Type 2. And I was like, oh, I'll just play Type 1, whatever. I think that was basically the gist of it. New players aren't very fond of their cards rotating out of Standard, which always kind of makes me laugh. But yeah, this is basically the same idea as Classic, right? That's like the Eternal Central version of this, although they have different ban lists. But I mean, I don't know. I've not seen anything about Classic ever being played in even middle school, right? Which is the Eternal Central version of pre-modern. Like I just don't see anyone ever talking about it anywhere or tournaments or whatnot. Like it's just whatever. Uh, but this format super super sweet. But it's not. Um, Uh, so there was a classic format also on MTGO, but it's not like this kind of format that we're talking about specifically. The classic format on the MTGO was it was like uh, it was not quite Vintage. Basically, they had like a different banned and restricted list. Like for example, I think on the classic on MTGO you could play like 4 Necro, and there was all sorts of other like really big changes. So that was interesting. But the classic I'm talking about is the Eternal Central version of this old frame format. And you're probably thinking, well, everything's $1 billion. It's not actually. Well, there are quote unquote budget decks. Again, this is a thing that happened in Vintage back in the day, although the cards were certainly much less expensive than they are now. I mean, think about like $50 workshops, things like that. $50 like mana drains, or actually, well, I mean, I think I even remember the Italian mana drains being like $15 because Italian Legends was super overprinted. But there's a lot of decks in this format that you can play as like actual budget decks. There are decks that work without power, so that's pretty sweet. And there's just tons of decks. I mean, I have them all listed out here. Even oddly enough, one of the things on the Old Frame website, which of course I will put down in the description, they talked about Oshawa Stompy, which was an extremely deep cut, extremely deep cut. It's an old Madness deck, basically. Uh, that brings back memories. That's old. That's old. Um, but yeah, so all sorts of different decks. There are even budget decks. So there's a lot. There's a lot going on here, boy. There's a lot going on here. All right, so let's look at some of the cards that I am super excited to play with again. This is just stuff that is basically available, right? So it's stuff that you can't like play in pre-modern or stuff that's banned or whatever. Obviously, Sinkhole and Him, these cards are awesome, super fun to play with. Um, and I mean, just playing black decks without these cards just doesn't feel right. It feels wrong. Chain Lightning, of course, that's one of my favorites. I love it. You know, you can't play Lightning Bolt without Chain Lightning. That's just weird. I love Chain Lightning. It's great. Regrowth, another good one. Again, also not available in pre-modern. Of course, it is restricted here for obvious reasons because unrestricted regrowth basically unrestricts your other cards that are really powerful. So regrowth is restricted here in the same vein as why things like Demonic Tutor and such are restricted. And of course, balance. I love balance. Balance is such a sweet card. So even just being able to play one of them is super duper sweet. All right, we got Psi Blast. That's right, Psionic Blast. This card actually sees or saw play. Well, I guess it would be seeing play, but in Fish. Fish decks will oftentimes play like one or two Psionic Blast. Card is super sweet. I love casting this back in the day. I had like a couple beta copies. When I was playing Fish, I always played Psi Blast, which I loved. That was awesome. Curd Ape, of course, is another good one, especially with fetch lands and dual lands, of course. I mean, of course, yeah, fetches, duels, like Mana Drain, Force of Will, like Workshop, like all these cards are fun to play, but that's not really the stuff I'm looking forward to playing. I want to play with these other older cards, you know. Sort of like 93, 94, but like playing them in decks that are a little more interesting to me, a little more powerful, you know. So yeah, that's why I like Curd Ape. And same thing with Serendipity. Same stuff, you know, if you want to play like a Zoo or whatever, like a blue, red, green version of Zoo, Curd Ape plus Efreet, I mean, that's good stuff. That's super fun. And of course, Maze of Ith. Who doesn't like casting Maze of Ith? Playing Maze of Ith, and then playing another one. That's great. I just love it. Not exactly the most impactful card, but I just love playing it. So there you go. And of course, Suchi as well as Juggernaut. These are sweet cards like in TNT, any other workshop aggro deck. Super fun, super fun. Yeah, just slamming like Mox, Shop, like Juggernaut, Suchi. That's sweet. That's super sweet. I love it a lot. All right. Like I said, Alpha through Scourge. This doesn't have any of the portal sets, though, so it's basically just like pre-modern. Still plays the normal rule set, contemporary rules, I should say. But yeah, no portal and stuff, which isn't a big deal, right? Like, it's not like you're really missing out on much. The band list, very impressed with it. Very good stuff. Whoever put that together definitely had a. I mean, in some respects, it is a reflection of like what was banned at the beginning of 2003, or I should say in the middle of 2003. I mean, for example, Lion's Eye Diamond wasn't actually banned until December. Same thing with like, or excuse me, restricted. Same thing with Burning Wish. And Chromox was restricted at that time. So it was only after Mirrodin came out that they restricted LAD. But obviously, like you you can't have Black Lotus going around. I mean, as much as I loved playing Long, it doesn't really make a ton of sense to play that deck again. It's definitely pretty insane. But yeah, ban list looks great. A lot of really powerful decks, which is really sweet. Of course, there's also meta decks. I mean, obviously, like if people are playing budget decks or whatever. And of course, you can metagame your decks against the powerful combo and control decks, of course. And we'll look at an example of that, actually. And this is basically, yeah, we're just trying to, the idea is just to play, you know, what did Magic look like? What did Type 1, what did Vintage look like before Mirrodin? Mirrodin, of course, made everything, really shook everything up. Think about like maybe Innistrad block, right, when that came out, in like, well, for all of Magic, but especially the older formats like Legacy. So think about like that, or even maybe sort of like the new last couple of years where they've been really pushing up the power level on cards. So like Mirrodin block was that sort of level of power in older formats, and especially Vintage. So it's really interesting to sort of see these decks, especially like people working on them now with more like a better, more robust understanding of theory and everything else. It'll be interesting to see if anything else turns up. I mean, obviously, since having the new rules, like stuff is de-errated So stuff like Time Vault and Dreadnought. So you can play Stifle Knot, Dreadstill, whatever, that kind of thing. But I did mention the ban list, and we might as well go over it. And some of this stuff won't be too weird. It'll be pretty obvious. So let's go ahead and look at it. All right. So here we go. We got the banned list, and what is banned and what is restricted. Of course, the only cards that are banned are things like Anti, right? Anti being like, well, the old cards, the first couple years, where you would actually take other people's cards, like gain possession of them. So not only did players just typically not like losing their moxes and stuff like that in dual lands, this would also make them run afoul of certain, gambling laws like in the EU and places like that. So there's a lot of like legal stuff to do with anti, why it's not a thing anymore. Obviously, it's just a garbage mechanic. It's easily the worst mechanic in the game. So yeah, anti stuff is banned, and of course manual dexterity cards are banned. So Falling Star, Chaos Orb, but everything else is just restricted. And the idea is that like even really really powerful stuff like Power 9, people want to be able to play with these cards somewhere. And so Vintage is basically like, okay, we're recognizing that these cards are completely ridiculous, even as one-ofs. They fundamentally warp the game in a pretty powerful way, very obvious way. But people want to play with them, so we're going to let them play with them. So that's basically the main gist of why Vintage exists as is, and why it has a restricted list, but we don't see it anywhere else. Because the point is to let people play with these cards somewhere. Every single card in the game should be playable somewhere outside of the anti-manual dexterity cards. So, but with that in mind, with the restricted list, basically the point is to reduce access to these extremely powerful busted cards. So of course all the Power 9 are. Other really powerful game-breaking unbalanced cards, again, also going to be restricted. And then of course tutors, which again reduce the purpose, right? It mitigates cards being restricted, right? If you're able to play like 4 demonic tutors, you can always get your ancestral recall and stuff like that. And obviously, this isn't a good thing. This isn't a good thing. So again, pretty much every good playable tutor has to be restricted. So, but yeah, without further ado, let's start at the top. Again, starting off strong with ancestral recall. Yep, one of the Power 9, so obviously this is going to be restricted. Again, one of the best cards in the game. Of course, I think it's worse than Black Lotus, but also worse than Contract. Contract from Below. But of course, Contract from Below, thankfully, is just a ridiculous anti card. So it has anti, so it's gone, but Contract would probably literally be banned if it didn't have anti. The card is completely nuts. Alright, anyways, moving on. We have Balance. Balance, again, a completely busted card, and it's even better in Vintage than it would be in other formats because of the presence of all this powerful artifact mana, which gets around the restriction of Balance to, well, you don't have as many lands in play, right, when you cast it. So Balance, really, really good in Vintage. Really powerful, I mean, absolutely back-breaking play against aggro decks. Way too good there. Thankfully, Balance, I mean, thankfully Balance is restricted because it's just too powerful, too good against aggressive decks. And it's just too much of a swing against all sorts of other things. Lotus, yep, Power 9, we know why that's here. Channel. Channel is certainly not as good without access to things like Eldrazi or Charbelcher or whatnot, but I can certainly see some sort of mud list or whatever, splashing green or like red-green or something for Channel because, well, Channel produces a lot of colorless mana, and what do these mud decks want? They want to play a lot of artifacts. So, I mean, you do the math. So yeah, definitely not as broken as it would be in like more modern era, but still pretty stupid. Consultation, Demonic Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, again, same thing. These are just too powerful, right? And of course, just undo the restriction on certain cards. So they of course as well have to be restricted. Foth, this was banned because, or excuse me, this was restricted because of the really powerful mono blue control decks, basically BBS. I'll let you figure out what that means. But the really powerful mono blue controls from about 2000, 2001 played just four Fact or Fiction, and of course in a format with Moxen and all these other powerful mana accelerators, that 3 in the corner of Fact or Fiction starts looking more like 1 or 2. So yeah, very, very insane. Definitely when you have tons of free colorless mana sitting around, it's just unbelievable. I mean, control decks are just so good with all like the Moxen, just like because these decks are so slow, but having this free like colorless or colored mana, insane, really insane in those sort of decks. Fast Bond, of course. Well, I mean, whatever. It's nuts with stuff like Wasteland and Strip Mine. It can ramp you. It does a ton, and of course, it's very good with Wheel of Fortune effects. All the draw 7s in the format, Bargain, Necro, things like that. Fast Bond is very, very good in those style of decks too. Flash, mostly just for its interaction with Academy Rector, which of course fetches Bargain, which more or less lets you win immediately. So being have another real easy, simple way to sacrifice a Rector to get a Bargain, just too good, too good. Those Rector decks were already pretty strong back in the day, and they couldn't even play Flash. So yeah, definitely glad this is a card that is restricted. Okay, now we have Frantic Search. This is probably just restricted due to its interaction with Tolarian Academy. Obviously, this card eventually came off the Type 1, or I should say, Vintage restricted list. I mean, it's like it could even be ostensibly played in like a High Tide style deck, which is, I guess that makes sense why it would be restricted. But obviously, yeah, it's mostly its interaction with Academy producing absurd amounts of mana. And of course, we have Grim Monolith again. Monolith Key, of course, just produces tons of mana, and could be certainly problematic in the artifact style decks, just producing too much mana, that kind of thing. Gush, restricted because it's Gush, right? This card is absolutely busted. I have many videos talking about how broken Gush is, how the Groatog deck was completely nuts, etc., etc. I don't really want to rehash that here, but this is card drawing that's on par with or even better than Ancestral Recall, so that says a lot. Then of course we have Lion's Eye Diamond. Basically, in a lot of the combo decks, it was Black Lotus 2 through 5. Yeah, Black Lotus is a pretty good card, so we probably shouldn't give combo decks 4 more of them, so of course it was restricted. Although it was in December of 2003 when it was restricted in Vintage, which that was after Mirrodin came out, but I think obviously the problem of these Burning Long decks, the Academy Storm decks, or whatever you want to call them, they were, well, to say that they were oppressive is perhaps to undersell it. Again, fast mana is very oppressive because it's not just like kind of like, oh, I have a little bit of fast mana and it's okay. It's not like a linear increase, right, in the amount of ridiculous things you can do. Every additional piece of fast mana, unrestricted fast mana, causes a lot of problems. So having stuff like Grim Monolith and Lotus Petal restricted, even though they may look a little weak on their own, like these of course are legacy legal cards, but they really do need to, I mean, they're just so much better, like especially because the card quality is so high in Vintage. You need stuff like Petal and Monolith restricted. Library is restricted, of course, because this is a brutal card to face when you're trying to play fair. Imagine trying to beat a deck that's drawing twice as many cards as you every turn, and that's just the base rate. The thing can even cast spells. It taps for colorless. I mean, this card is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Library is definitely, yeah, that's quite a card. That's quite a card. Okay, moving on. Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, again, more powerful mana ramp. So these, of course, have to be restricted. Jar, just another draw 7. Synergy with stuff like Welder and Tinker and things like that make it even more busted in some respects than things like Wheel of Fortune, depending on the context. Merchant Scroll, this gets you your Gush or your Ancestral. Yeah, we got to get rid of this guy too. This was certainly problematic. So we really want to tone down the blue decks, some of these powerful blue combo control decks, or even just control decks. So yeah, restricted Merchant Scroll. Yeah, it's true. It's true. All right, Mind Twist. With so many free, cheap ramp, right? Artifact ramp, even stuff like Dark Ritual. Mind Twist is pretty brutal. Without the biggest problem with, like, say, trying to play, if it was unbanned, like in Legacy, trying to play Mind Twist, you're gonna have to invest a lot of resources. You're gonna have to build your deck in a certain way to really power up Mind Twist, which has all sorts of hidden costs that people just don't think about. But those costs just don't exist when you can play the original Moxen and a bunch of other, like, ramp. So Mind Twist is very rightfully restricted here. Not a big problem. I'm perfectly fine. I think Mind Twist does again get unrestricted later in Vintage, but it's like a decade later or something, I believe. So yeah, we're pretty fine having restricted Mind Twist. It's definitely one of those cards in respects, sort of like Balance, and it's just like too easy, too much advantage, too cheap, no cost, that kind of thing. Mind's Desire. Again, this is another ridiculous combo card. This card was so busted that they basically restricted it right after it was released in Scourge. Like, this thing is nuts. I mean, this thing is just like, just the card quality in Vintage is so high in these older formats, right? In old frame, that like revealing 5 cards and like you just get a bunch of just like ridiculous broken cards, you know, like Bargain and things like that, and just casting them for free is just unbelievable. I mean, just unbelievable. So yeah, Mind's Desire, very rightfully restricted. All the Moxen, yep, Power 9. Diamond, of course, is insane with all of the like wheel effects. So it's basically free there as well, especially in something like Jar, right? Mystical Tutor, again, another powerful tutor. Necropotence, this is kind of an interesting one. This one is obviously pretty ridiculous. It's an insane combo engine. It would be nice to play it if, again, it couldn't be played in combo decks, but that's not the case. So yeah, turn 1 Rit Necro, or Lotus Necro, or Land Jet Petal Necro, or something. Like, it's just too easy to get out on the first turn. It just ends the game before your opponent can even have a turn. It's just too powerful in a lot of these combo decks. Unfortunately, we can at least play one. Fortunately, we can at least play one. So, you know, that's okay. Them's the breaks, but that's how it goes. All right, regrowth. Same thing as with the tutors. Again, it basically, we don't really want to unrestrict the restricted cards, so we gotta restrict regrowth. Soul Ring, again, broken ramp. Strip Mine, it is Strip Mine. I don't think I need to say anything else. Academy, same thing. We don't need to give blue decks a ton of mana ramp, so Academy is, of course, restricted. Spirals looks a little wonky, but again, these think about the context of these cards with Tolarian Academy, pretty busted, right? So not only is it free, but it probably produces like 3 or 4 mana at least every time. So yeah, yeah, pretty nuts. Time Vault, because the format Old Frame uses the current contemporary rules, things like the errata on Phyrexian Dreadnought or Time Vault don't exist. So of course, Vault Key is a combo that ends the game because you just tank infinite turns. So yep. Power 9, Time Walk Time Twister, of course these are Power 9, so whatever. Tinker, another broken tutor, but also a mana ramp. So yep, this should be quadruple restricted, right? Vampiric Tutor, again, another unbounded tutor. Just get whatever you want. Yep, that's same reason why all the other tutors are banned. Excuse me, restricted. I keep screwing that up. Voltaic Key. It's the Key Vault, of course, as well as, again, ostensibly producing too much mana with Grim Monolith or Mana Vault. That could be an issue. The Draw 7s, Wheel of Fortune Windfall, these are very powerful, very insane with all this fast mana around. Bargain, yep, that's a good card to cheat into play or just hard cast. This gives you infinite cards. Yeah, I mean, what do I need to say about Bargain, right? It's so much more broken when you have access to all this artifact mana. And of course, Yawgmoth's Will, probably the most broken card in the format at this point in time. It basically always ends the game on the spot. Even weak wills of only like getting like two or three cards back can be absolutely devastating. Because again, like just the power level of all the cards in this format is just like, get my Lotus back, get my Ancestral back, recast Time Walk, that kind of stuff is just brutal. So yeah, definitely really, really powerful, really good stuff on here. But this is just a short overview of why these cards are restricted. All right, so that was the banned list and restricted list. So let's go ahead and look at one of these sort of meta decks or budget considerations or whatever you would like to call it. I think it's actually pretty sweet, still pretty good. Yeah, this is basically a Sligh list, right? Again, none of this stuff should be too weird, too wonky to you. Obviously, there's some things that are a little bit unique to this, probably compared to other lists you've ever seen. The first one being Ankh Mishra. Ankh being colorless damage is pretty important, especially, of course, with the ubiquity of fetch lands, and even against stuff like Gush. It's very powerful. But nothing else is too weird. Only 2 pops. I didn't know exactly. I had a couple flex slots left. I mean, you could even put something like Mog Fanatics or Grim Lavamancer or something in that place. It kind of depends on what you expect to face, right? Price of Progress, of course, is very good against all the very basic heavy sort of decks. So, or excuse me, non-basic heavy, of course. The only thing weird probably in the sideboard would be the Scalds, right? Scald is very sweet. This is obviously pretty powerful against like the blue decks. It's very proactive, right? Works really well with the mana denial. Very good stuff here. And even if you don't draw any of the mana denial stuff, it's still very good, right? Every time they tap their islands for mana. So very good here. This is definitely excellent against things like Copperhead and things like that too. So yeah, Scald, very sweet, very powerful. It dodges kegs, things like that by being, well, not only an enchantment, but also 2 mana. So yeah, definitely good stuff there. Let's take a little bit of a more in-depth look. What we have here, of course, starting off is Gorilla Shaman, also very fondly known as Mox Monkey. This guy destroys, or girl, I mean, shoot, I don't know. How do you tell gorillas apart? Anyways, this monkey, or ape, well, technically it's an ape, but who cares, right? Who's counting? Anyways, you can pay a colorless to destroy 0 mana artifacts. Of course, only non-creature artifacts, of course. But yeah, this is super duper sweet. It really just nukes the crap out of well, Moxes, right? So it's part of the mana denial plan, and of course also being a 1 mana 1/1, so it beats down pretty well, or good enough at least. And then of course we have Strip Mine. This is part of the Wasteland Strip package, which is just I'm playing lands that kill your lands because I have a mana curve of 1. Pretty heady stuff, I know, right? Ankh of Mishra. This one, of course, like I said previously, the prevalence of fetch lands as well as like as needing colorless sources of damage against things like the combo control decks or the hard control decks. That is really good there. Ankh is very good there, as well as just being a 2 mana spell, so you don't get completely mega blown out by Powder Keg. Goblin Cadets, due to the nature of old frame, right? This format as well as other older historical vintage formats, Cadets is basically a 1-mana 2/1 without a drawback, because there's just not a lot of creatures it's going to be bumping into. So yeah, pretty good here, pretty good here. And of course, something like Rack and Ruin, there's a ton of artifact-based decks. There's a lot of things like Mask Knot, so this lets you kill a Dreadnought and an Illusionary Mask, or 2 Suchis and or Juggernauts, or any combination of those, or Triskelion, or all sorts of different things. So yeah, Rack and Ruin, pretty powerful sideboard card. Really good stuff there. Okay, now we have Black Vice. Obviously, Black Vice is a pretty good combo, right? If you're not playing your lands, right, and because you're afraid of or don't want to take the damage from Ankh of Mishra, your hand's going to get clogged up with stuff. And of course, what's Black Vice good against? Super clogged hands. Is Vice better than something like Curse Scroll? Is it good in addition to it? Should I take out the 2 pops to play 2 more Black Vice? I don't know. It's not a restricted card. It was back in the day, of course. But obviously, it's a little... obviously, the problem with Black Vice is that it's very variable, right? Sometimes it can just do nothing. So that's obviously not good, you know. So... you know, it would be interesting to figure this out, but I'm just avoiding them for the time being, but it's definitely something to keep on your mind. And speaking of keeping things on your mind, of course, Barbarian Ring. 1 or 2 copies of this thing is awesome. Being hit by Wasteland, not that awesome. That's actually really bad. So yeah, you really want to have a lot of mana to activate Curse Scroll and even just to play multiple spells a turn or something. So yeah, Barbarian Ring can be as much of a curse as it is a boon. So yeah, depends on what decks you're looking at, but 1 or 2 copies is something to think about. And of course, we have Grim Lavamancer. We don't run our own fetch lands, so it's going to be harder to fill up our graveyard. But Lavamancer is very good against the other weenie decks. Again, it could go in the flex slots where the 2 Price of Progress are. Of course, a lot of these weenie decks are monocolor. Grim Lavamancer, pretty good against a lot of those weenie decks. So, something to keep in mind. Something to not keep in mind is Wheel of Fortune. This card is a trap. Do not play this card. This will draw your opponent into cards that are a lot better than yours. Either it's Yawgmoth's Will or Balance or Tutors for those ridiculous cards, or it'll draw them into their combo, or just don't play Wheel of Fortune. It's not like, the only time it would be good would be like on turn 10 when you have like 7 lands in play or something, and you can just cast all the cards you have. But yeah, it's just, you know, you don't want to get to that part of the game anyways if you can help it. So yeah, Wheel of Fortune, not good, definitely a trap. Fork, very much the same thing. It's very similar to Black Vice, in which case it can be kind of dead, but it can also be like really, really broken. So think about, like, I mean, obviously copying your lightning bolts and stuff with it is okay, like that's fine. Obviously copying Fire Blast with it is really great. But other than those, I mean, if you want to, you can copy your opponent's stuff too, right? So obviously things like Ancestral Recall, Demonic Tutor, as well as things like Time Walk. These would be really great, really powerful cards to copy, to fork. But the problem is you have to hold up mana for it. I mean, that's not really something you can really be doing. You can't be sitting around holding mana up the entire time. Not only is it telegraphed, really badly telegraphed, but it's just not that good. You don't have the time. You don't have the time, right, to be screwing around trying to get that sweet, juicy ancestral or something, you know. So yeah, I would definitely not play this card. It's sweet, I love it, but I just don't think it's very good. All right, so this is a sweet format. It is kind of expensive, but there are, like I said, budget decks, and there's a lot of different kind of decks too, which is really sweet. And I actually really like the kind of gameplay it offers, because there's a lot that's going on, a lot happening, especially again with all the mana ramp, mana acceleration everyone has access to. There's a lot of really, really cool stuff, you know, people can do. And it's nice to see these cards in different contexts. Like, most people probably aren't familiar or haven't played with these cards before, so they're unfamiliar with how they played out, back in the day or whatever, right? Like with, people play Juggernaut? Yeah, people play Juggernaut. So that's always kind of sweet. And just the format just looks good, right? Just the old border cards, just playing everything, gloves off, you get your dual lanes, you get your fetch lanes, you get to play all these different things. It's pretty exciting. But yeah, there you go. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I don't want to go on forever, but yeah, it's definitely pretty sweet, pretty sweet. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you check out this format. I hope you check out the website. It's really cool, really interesting. And don't be super deterred by the price, right? Like, there are budget decks. Of course, you can't play everything, but I mean that's kind of the appeal, right? To play all these old powerful cards. But yeah, so that's it. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.